So what we tend to remember is the peak moments. Whether those moments are either good or bad, we tend to remember them. And we also tend to remember the ending. In the previous two videos on this series of experiential marketing, or the experience economy, I talked about the importance of physical experiences in terms of engaging customers with a brand or product, and digital experiences, in particular integrating physical and digital experiences together. In this one, I just want to talk about some important considerations for creating experiences. The first is that when people experience something, they often forget about its length. And I don't know, this is something that I've experienced because I go to a lot of concerts and I often feel like I'm waiting around a long time for the concert to start. And then the concert actually happens and I have a great time. And when I reflect back on it, I often don't remember how boring it was waiting around for the concert to start. You know, I've been on flights where they lost my luggage and it took a day or two to get my luggage. And you don't really remember that as the key part of your experience. I just remember, oh man, I had a great trip. You know, whatever, I had to stop and get a toothbrush at the store, but I had an enjoyable trip. So what we tend to remember is the peak moments. Whether those moments are either good or bad, we tend to remember them. And we also tend to remember the ending. And this is according to the work of Barbara Fredrickson, the psychologist. And one of the theories behind why we remember the peak experiences, whether it's really good or really bad, is that carries the most relevant information in terms of if we do that thing again. If something really bad happens, then when the notion of doing that activity pops up again, we want to immediately remember what the potential costs are, what the potential risks and downside of that activity is. Because that's the most important factor in terms of our own, health and well-being. Another thing about experiences is that we gravitate towards landmarks. So we create very complex experiences about big landmarks like marriage, but also birthdays, and especially major birthdays like 20 years old, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, those major milestones. New Year's Eve is another experience. That's a big landmark to mark the coming of a new year, which is largely a construction in our heads to help us understand the new year. But one interesting thing is that companies now, with all the data that they have, they can create their own landmarks that don't necessarily align with the typical landmarks that we have in society. So, for example, one landmark that we don't really celebrate is people's first day on the job. We could do something to make that be a much more memorable experience. So one thing Fitbit does is they give an award known as the 747 badge if you climb up 4,000 flights of stairs, which is the altitude that 747s fly. That's a pretty cool and interesting landmark that you've climbed up to the length that a 747 would fly. And they're aware that that's an interesting thing to let people know about. Obviously, your banks could celebrate if you reach some sort of savings milestone, but they're not really doing that. Even our car insurance could, help us celebrate the fact that we didn't get into any accidents. That's a pretty good thing. Then you got social media companies, because they have access to so much information about us. They could help us celebrate if we post 10,000 words on our social media. And the importance of experiences in terms of helping us reflect on things is well demonstrated by rituals like funerals. They really help us process the death of loved ones. And Steve Jobs actually recognized this, and he held a funeral for the Mac OS 9 operating system. And that's one way to really make people understand that this is over, is to create a ceremony around it. It's a really smart thing to do. So another thing to know about experiences for companies is that often they focus on enhancing the experience of people who are unhappy. So it's estimated that they spent 80% of their resources trying to improve the experiences of unhappy people. And I'll put more information below so you can learn more about this. But it turns out that you'll have a better return on investment if you improve the experience of people who are already happy with your product than if you improve people who are unhappy. That's because people who are unhappy are kind of unlikely to use the product or service again. But for the people who are happy, if you enhance their experience, then you create something really memorable and you make them a return customer and you influence them to talk about their experiences to their friends. And basically, they report that elevating the positives returns 9 times more revenue than eliminating the negatives. So it's a super important thing to keep in mind, but it's not necessarily something that's intuitive because unhappy people kind of get your attention more than happy. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say. So finally, there's another interesting little tidbit here, which is, it's a little quirk about human behavior, is that we'll actually report better customer service if you make a few mistakes, but you correct those mistakes in a really thorough way. If you really show your appreciation in the act of correcting mistakes. And this is compared to if you're completely perfect. If it's completely perfect, they won't necessarily notice you. But if you make a mistake and you do an excellent job of correcting that mistake, then they actually perceive that you have better customer service. And I think this is something that IT folks understand, is that they don't really notice the importance of the IT folks until something goes wrong and they fix it. So anyway, in this series on the experiential marketing or the experience economy, I've talked about the importance of creating physical experiences around goods and services and the importance of integrating physical and digital experiences. In this video, I talked about some considerations for that, some psychology behind that. So I hope you enjoyed this series. Hit that subscribe and the bell if you want more on this. Hit that like if you like this, and hit the share if you'd like to share. Thanks for checking this out.